Hi everyone, welcome to our pitch for our podcast, Cooped Up. I'm Sage. I'm going to be talking about the title and the logo of Cooped Up, and then Lewis is going to talk about the intro and the outro, before Monika is going to wrap up and talk about music and SFX. So, here we go. So, first and foremost, why did we pick the title Cooped Up for a podcast? First of all, it's very short and sweet, straight to the point. It grips listeners' attention before they even listen to it. It's a very catchy title. We didn't want to go with something that was longer and more drawn out just so we could grab people's attention right away. Second of all, I think it provides a sense of community. You know, we're all cooped up right now and it sucks, and this podcast could be some sort of form of a distraction or relief for some people. Going off what I just said before, it really connects back to the overall theme that we are in fact cooped up. We're stuck inside in quarantine. So I think that it would really give the listeners an idea of the subject before they've actually tuned into the podcast. Next up, of course, we have the logo. First of all, I just want to credit my friend Dom. She did this artwork and we kind of talked about it together and developed an idea. So thank you so much to her for doing that. She's very talented. As you can see, the logo, it's very bright and inviting. This black and white wall, as you can see in the corner, it's this cartoon little guy here. He's cooped up in a corner, which kind of signifies like darkness, maybe a little bit of morbid sadness, which, you know, right now sucks, but as you can see coming out of the laptop, it's kind of giving this beam of light off. So again, that's kind of implying that this podcast is a bit of a more relaxing one, more of a source of comfort for people maybe, rather than a really depressing news story, for example, about coronavirus. It's very simple, it's cartoonish, which again implies this sort of relaxed, more laid-back approach to the topic rather than a more serious approach. So yeah, that's our title and logo, and I will now pass it on to Lewis, who will be talking about the intro and the outro.
So I'm going to talk about what we're going to say during the Cooped Up. And we decided to separate it into two parts, the intro and outro. As for the intro part, you can say it's more of a serious tone and we want to make it into a serious topic. And we separate it into three parts. So the first part is more of like a what's the name of and who made this. It's like 20 self-isolated students who made this. And what is our goal? What is our aiming for? Aiming to set up a platform for the people who are stuck in the quarantine. And why we're going to make this? Because of this COVID-19 situation. And for the second part, it's more of how we're going to do it. So we interview people from around the globe who's like reflecting their own experience. So it's not only thing for Australia or like Melbourne, it's more of a globe thing. And to share their like experience and stories to how they facing their pandemic. And for the third part, it's actually the legal part to the announcement of nation and like RMIT media studios and everything that we have to add in the beginning, the intro. And after that, you can jump into the hi, I'm your host Who, and today we're gonna interview Who and jump right into the tape. And for the outro, we decided to use more of like a casual and easy way to end this, because after this serious topic and serious talking, we decided to make an easy ending. And you can say it's just like you've reached the end of Cooped Up, of course, and thanks for everyone again. And we also make something like make sure to subscribe, so it's like attract more audience maybe. And at last, it's more like a friendly goodbye thing. So it's like stay safe, and we'll see you soon. See you in the next episode, something like that. So it's more of an easy ending. And here's our demo of intro and outro.
The economy and the budget will take a big hit from the outbreak of coronavirus.
The unseen danger of coronavirus.
Doctors struggle to contain the spread of the coronavirus.
Coronavirus is spreading rapidly across Australia.
Has tested positive for COVID-19.
Stay at home. It will break the chain of transmission and it will save lives.
Welcome to Cooped Up, a podcast created by 20 self-isolated students who share one common goal: to provide a platform and share the voices of those stuck in quarantine after being affected by the recent COVID-19 outbreak. Join us as we interview humans from around the globe who reflect on their own experiences, stories, and daily routines as they navigate their life around the uncertainty and chaos of the current pandemic.
On behalf of RMIT, we'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on which RMIT Media Studios take place, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
And you just reached the end of this episode of Cooped Up. Thanks again for our guests, RMIT, and everyone's support in order to make this happen. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
So I'm going to be talking about the music and the sound effects that we chose to use within the introduction and the outro of the podcast sample. So as we all know, music is a pretty important part of a podcast. It sets the tone, the mood, and the overall vibe, I guess. And it's important that it does that because it draws the listeners and engages the listeners from the beginning. It's also important that the music adheres and complements the tone and the voice of the narrator, as well as the tone of the podcast itself. So we aim to find music that is quite ambient and mellow, but at the same time upbeat and elevating, you could say. And that was done with the intention of eliciting certain emotions within our audience. So things like curiosity, wonder, and concern. And choosing a musical piece that is quite soft ensures that the music doesn't take away from the actual podcast content, and it doesn't overshadow the narrator's or speaker's voice, as well as ensuring that it's not distressing or doesn't cause any discomfort for any vulnerable audiences. The music also works quite well with our title being Cooped Up and the artwork depicting a cartoon figure slouched down with his headphones in, listening to the podcast, you could say. So the artwork itself is quite vibrant and bold, but at the same time mellow and chilled out. So yeah, you could say it works really well with the soundtrack that we've chosen. So in the beginning of the introduction part of the podcast, we chose to compilate a series of global news segments that all in some way mention or address the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic. So this would immediately give an indication to listeners as to what the podcast is actually about without them having to read the show notes or the description of the podcast. For the outro of our podcast, we chose to use a different piece of music, and that was just to separate the beginning and the end of the podcast. The music that we chose was still quite warm and upbeat, probably a lot more upbeat than the first piece of music that we used. And it definitely complements the narrator's or the speaker's, being Lewis's, tone of voice, and encourages the listener to continue listening to the series beyond the first episode. So on behalf of myself, Lewis, and Sage, we thank you for listening to our pitch, and we hope that you vote and choose us.